Hello and welcome to the Multiplanetary Society podcast. I'm your host, Timothy Reuter. Usually this is the part where I briefly mention that this is the podcast of the Institute for Space Science and Development. And on this episode, I want to talk a little bit about what that means. Today I have with me my fellow Institute for Space Science and Development board members, Bhavya Lal and Roger Myers. We co-founded the ISSD as a space policy startup focused on bringing together science, engineering, economics, and policy for a spacefaring society. Bhavya and Roger recently co-wrote a report entitled Strategy Options for U.S. Nuclear Leadership for the Department of Energy's Idaho National Laboratory, which we are going to discuss today. Just to be clear, although ISSD board members worked on this, it is not a product of the ISSD. Bhavya is a former Associate Administrator for Technology, Policy, and Strategy at NASA, where she created and provided executive leadership to the NASA Office of Technology, Policy, and Strategy, and simultaneously made history as the first woman to serve as NASA's acting chief technologist. Roger is the former Executive Director for Advanced Programs at Aerojet Rocketdyne, where he worked on propulsion systems that went to every planet in our solar system. He is also a current member of the National Academy of Engineering. Bhavya and Roger, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
It's an honor to be here. Timothy, thanks for having us.
So let's start with the basics. What was the assignment that the Idaho National Labs gave you for producing this report, and how did you get involved in this project?
Good question. So Idaho National Lab reached out and asked us to develop a national strategy for space, nuclear power, and propulsion. So a pretty straightforward assignment. And the reason I think Roger and I said yes was Idaho wasn't going to micromanage us. They weren't going to tell us what to write. They truly wanted a strategy. And the reason we said yes was that's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to write just another roadmap. We wanted to lay out a focused, executable strategy. And again, we've all been doing this to know that a strategy is not a vision. It's not a wish list. It's not a consensus roadmap. And we certainly didn't want to write another 100-page study that tries to make everyone happy and ends up doing nothing. And that meant going back to first principles. Real strategy means you start with a diagnosis of the problem. What is it that we are trying to solve for? Why have we not succeeded? And then you kind of go with, well, what's a guiding policy to solve it? And then you lay out a coherent, sequenced set of actions to execute. So that's what we wanted to do, and that's what Idaho said we were fine doing, and that's why we said yes.
I think the really great opportunity here was that we weren't going to be micromanaged. Both Bhavya and I have been part of the space nuclear community for decades and watched these programs come and crash and come and crash over and over again. And this was this was an opportunity for us to step back and ask, why did that happen? Why have we failed? And ask, what is a good pathway that might break that endless sequence of start, fail, start, fail, start, fail. And so it was really an opportunity to ask some bigger questions for the nation and establish a pathway that makes good sense to us and from an objective perspective with no preconceived notions about, what's the right answer. We don't have any axe to grind other than that we both believe that space nuclear systems will ultimately be essential for the nation to advance its interests in space. So with that focus of creating that vision and enabling that vision, we said, what's the right pathway given all of the starts and stops of the past, the current technology status, the current environment? What's the right pathway? So it was a great opportunity.
Great. So let's talk about the big picture a bit. Despite decades of interest, the U.S. still hasn't flown an Operation Fissional Reactor in space since 1965. Why not?
So Timothy, you're exactly right. I know we have failed to deploy space nuclear systems, and it's not because we lack the physics or the funding or the people. At the core, what we have lacked is a mission pull. And in fact, as I think Roger said, this pattern has been maddeningly consistent. Because there's no mission pull, there's no sustained tech development, as you could see with what just happened with the Draco program. Because there's no sustained tech development, no flight comes about. When there's no flight, there's no trust. No trust means no mission pull, no funding, no tech development. And so the cycle resets. It's a classic chicken and egg problem. So that's the heart of the problem, but obviously it's never one thing, right? It's a combination of a few factors. Another one is overreach before readiness. Past efforts have started too big. We want to lay out grand visions. So, for example, the NASA GEMO Prometheus program, it aimed for a 200 kilowatt electric propulsion system before proving a basic reactor. And in general, the lack of an incremental path makes failure almost inevitable. Ambition outpaces technical maturity. So that's kind of a second piece. A third piece is, and actually that was something that really we were able to tease out during discussions. So as I wanted to tell you, the way we did the study was we reviewed the history. We kind of got a sense of what we've done, why have past efforts failed. We did more than 100 interviews with experts in industry, in government, in academia, think tanks, to really get a sense of what some of these problems are and what next steps are. So one thing we learned through that interview process was that there's a structural mismatch. U.S. political and budgetary cycles, for example, the DoD POMS, operates sort of on a 2 to 5 year frame. These large programs, at least the way we conceptualize them, these big grand visions, take 10 to 20 years. And there's this mismatch that has basically doomed every effort. When timelines of development outlast political attention spans, programs are restructured, delayed, or canceled before hardware is ever built, which is what happened with GEMO Prometheus for sure. And last but not least, I think we've seen fragmented leadership and accountability. When there's no single authority to align agencies, resolve conflicts, or drive execution, then there is no path to flight. And again, a really good counterexample is the nuclear Navy program, where there is an office of naval reactors, which makes sure that there is not just the tech development that happens, but also the workforce, the supply chains. I mean, they watch for developments happening and making sense, and they are a clear owner, which the space nuclear community doesn't have. And of course, without a clear owner, there's no institutional accountability for delivery or failure.
Yeah, I want to pull, just to build on Bhavya's points, I want to pull a little bit more on the very first point she made, which is mission pull. Any technology development program, any first off development activity is going to run into problems like Draco did. And you've got to have mission pull in order to get through those. There's got to be a willingness and a drive, a need for the technology to get you through those rough patches on the road. Without that mission pull, the smallest hiccup is going to derail the program and get it to stop. And that ties back into the political environment, the political mismatch, the timing mismatch. It's only with mission pull that you can get through those, rough patches, be they technological, be they political, be they whatever source of challenge a technology maturation program runs into. You need to have mission pull to get through that. And that was a key focus of our interviews, is trying to really tease out, where is the mission pull? Is there a mission pull? And we found some for some aspects of technology.
Talk about that. So what is the mission pull now for space nuclear, and how is that different in this moment?
So one new major development, and actually it is very new as of the end of last year, is that NASA has formally selected nuclear fission as a primary power source for Mars surface power. In fact, this is what gives the effort the strongest mission pull it has had ever. And of course, anything that we want to be having reliably operating on Mars, we want to have, we want to start on the moon. So that's where NASA is at. In addition, NASA has had a very strong, so NASA did this work on what are the most important challenges for the Space Technology Mission Directorate, STMD, and the biggest one they found is to be able to get through the 14-day lunar night. So together with the surface power needs for Mars and the need to have to get through the lunar night are the two mission pulls that are bringing power to the forefront of development. Roger, did you want to add something to that?
Just that, as Bhavya said, those two areas, the one formal mission pull is from NASA's the Exploration Mission Directorate. But we also heard from from several companies out there that are interested in lunar resources. And I think it's very important to distinguish between survive the lunar night, where you can just have survival heaters to keep things a little bit warm through the 14-day lunar night, versus operate through the night. If you want to operate through the night and not have only a 50% utilization rate for your infrastructure, for your equipment, you need real power through the night. And that you can only do realistically with nuclear fission systems on the moon. And powering through the night is also extremely important from a geopolitical perspective. And I'll let Bhavya talk about that. But this is a special moment from that perspective also. It's not just the emergence of NASA's mission pull and the emerging commercial market opportunities, but there are also geopolitical reasons for wanting to be able to power through the night.
So I do want to get into that in a moment, but before we go there, can we just talk a little bit about potentially the military side of things? And is there a mission pull that's coming from there? Because this is obviously, or you talk about it in the paper as a civil military enterprise, something, a whole of society effort. So what does that look like on the military side of things in terms of mission pull?
Yeah, so we use the term mission pull very specifically, and we distinguish it from capability provided or even capability need. And mission pull is something that we say is formally being asked for by leadership. So NASA put out a white paper in which it said, here is a mission pull. This is what we need. We looked for something similar on the DoD side, and while we talked to lots of people who talked about what both power and propulsion can do for the Department of Defense, especially in light of the newly emerging activities under Golden Dome. What we found was the Department of Defense hasn't explicitly stated a mission pull. In fact, on the propulsion side in particular, so DoD has been silent on power, not saying anything about what they might need it for, let's say, directed energy or other, high power radar, other kind of applications for a small packet, high power density, right? On propulsion in particular, DoD actually said, they were asked specifically by Congress through the NDAA to say what they would like to use propulsion for. And DoD specifically noted that they will monitor developments, and then when technology is sufficiently advanced, consider it as part of a larger suite of things, factors that they use to consider technology infusion. So DoD has kind of gone out of its way to say that propulsion is something they're watching and not needing, and they have been silent on the power end. Having said that, like on the capability side, obviously, having both power and propulsion is extraordinarily important for national security. Again, there's more energy in a pellet of nuclear than, truckfuls of propellant, right? So I don't think that the problem is that nuclear is invaluable. The question is, what does leadership see as its comparative advantage, and they haven't articulated that.
I think one of the challenges with propulsion, I know one of the challenges with propulsion, is that there are many ways to accomplish missions. And you can do it with chemical propulsion, you can do it with solar electric propulsion, you can potentially do it with nuclear. And one of the things that mission planners always do is they look at many options. And there are other alternative architectures. I mean, we know that, for example, to get to Mars, we've got SpaceX saying they're going to use Starship. That's all chemical. NASA officially, in its official documents, says it's still studying the problem of how to transport humans and major cargo to Mars. And they're specifically looking at all various options in their official documents. The one common thing in all of this is that whatever architecture you're talking about, you need power on the surface of Mars, real power. You need power to operate on the surface of the moon. That is the common mission need. No matter what transportation architecture you use, you need surface power at your destination. There may or may not be needs for major nuclear power in high Earth orbits. Again, we're talking about nuclear safe orbits, so they're high altitude orbits, for military applications. Bobby and I believe that there are architectures and missions where they are necessary. But as Bobby has said, the DoD was silent on power. On propulsion, they were very explicit. We're letting other people lead, and we're not going to lead on nuclear propulsion, is essentially what the DoD said, because we're evaluating our architectures, and they do have options, and that's a true statement.
Yeah. And just one last thing on this mission pull question. The one country or entity that has fielded significant numbers of space nuclear systems is the Soviet Union. So can you just tell us the story of what was their mission pull and how did that impact what they ended up actually accomplishing?
Yeah, so that's a really great story to tell, Timothy, because that also makes this important distinction between nuclear as enhancing and nuclear as entirely enabling. And until nuclear is entirely enabling, we are not going to be able to make much progress. So what happened was, in the 1960s and 70s, the Soviets needed to track U.S. naval carrier groups in real time. That means that required radar satellites in low Earth orbit. However, their solar panel technology wasn't good enough because they had to be one, it wasn't good enough, and also they had to be in very low altitudes to be able to, do a good job, which means they were constantly facing drag. So using nuclear wasn't a luxury; it was the only solution. So they developed, I think, 1 to 3-ish kilowatt electric type, reactors, and later on, initially they were thermoelectric conversion reactors. Later on, they were thermionic. And they launched over 30 fission-powered spacecraft under these programs between, I think, the late 60s to the late 80s. Wow. And again, these were not tech demos. They were deployed at scale to meet a military requirement, which they couldn't fill any other way. And of course, the key lesson here, and again, to your point on mission pull, is that the mission came first and the technology followed. And which is kind of the inverse of what we are doing today, which is we are, developing technology, hoping that a mission shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing we have done technology push. And that has resulted in this endless start, stop, because the budget required for space nuclear is substantial. So it's a juicy target. When programs run into rough patches, it's always a juicy target to cut budgets. And if you have options to accomplish science, or if you have options to accomplish, your mission, your national security mission objective, you're going to go with those options. rather than continue a technology push program.
An
It's
example
not
of
until you
that.
have, go
Sorry.
ahead, Bob.
No, Roger, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not until you get real mission pull, a real mission like the Soviets had, where their solar, I mean, everybody needs to remember that a space system is complex. It has lots of different technologies, and there are usually many different ways of accomplishing a mission objective. And a mission planner's job is to look at all the different ways of accomplishing that mission objective and pick the best one, right? And and so if there are alternative ways of doing it that are cheaper, they're going to pick those cheaper ways. And that's really what Bhavya was saying, is that it's not until it's essential, like operating through the lunar night,
Right.
or on the surface of Mars where the solar flux is low and there are large dust storms that can kill solar panels for months at a time, where your battery mass for energy storage is enormous. I mean, it's hundreds of tons of battery mass to operate through the night at power. That you really have to have nuclear power. And once we really have to have nuclear power, once there's a real mission need, we can do this.
Right. There's no technical barrier. I mean, there are technologies that we
It's
have to work on,
hard.
but that is not.
Exactly. There are real engineering challenges that need to be worked through. But that's kind of the point, is we've got to have the mission pull in order to give us the drive and the sustaining effort through those engineering challenges.
So your report says that this moment is different, that we have a narrow window, technically, commercially, geopolitically, to get something in space by 2030. What has changed to make this a real opportunity for space nuclear after so many false starts? Why is this the moment?
So apart from the first issue we discussed, we actually finally have a mission pull, which, believe it or not, we hadn't ever had before. A second one is, and I think Roger alluded to that, is there is a new sense of geopolitical urgency today that we haven't had in a long time. China and Russia are both are developing jointly a megawatt class reactor and planning a nuclear powered lunar base. And I mean, that would be fine. They're doing lots of other things in space, but why is this important? The reason this is important is a continuously operating Chinese reactor on, let's say, the lunar South Pole would create de facto territorial control, something that, the Outer Space Treaty frowns upon. However, it would actually be not even undesirable, as in you do want a safety zone around your nuclear reactor for safety reasons. But then this actually gives them a justification to create an exclusion zone under the guise of safety. And again, in return, they are able to now redefine norms. The Outer Space Treaty allows them to force consultations before others can land nearby. Basically, it tilts the power table. In space, as on Earth, first movers make the law, and having the Chinese put a reactor on the moon first is problematic in that way. So that's kind of a second issue, geopolitical urgency. Then there's some other really incredible things that are happening that we need to leverage. For example, technology is at a point where things can be done much, much faster. We have advanced modeling and simulation tools. We have a new fuel that we didn't have before. So it used to be that all nuclear reactors in space, whether United States or Soviet, they all use highly enriched uranium, HEU. Mm-hmm. In recent years, there has been some research that shows that we can now use high assay low enriched uranium, or so HEU is enriched to about 93% or more. HALEU, which is what this fuel is called, is enriched to a little under 20% enrichment. And that makes a lot of the security concerns about using nuclear fuel in space go away. And it also allows for greater participation by commercial entities. Talking about commercial entities, we now have a more thriving than ever terrestrial commercial nuclear sector. And with these commercial companies, we can share supply chains. They are developing reactor types that are more amenable to being used in space. And they're developing a workforce, which is common. And again, the private sector readiness is not just on the supply side, but also on the demand side. Roger mentioned this earlier, that companies want to have high density power on the moon, or high density power in space for putting data centers or other compute capabilities. And last but not least, we have better policy clarity than we've had before. In fact, it was the first Trump administration that put out Space Policy Directive 6 that laid out a strategy, a high-level vision for space nuclear, and also put a policy document called National Security Presidential Memorandum 20, NSPM 20, that clarified the regulatory roles across agencies, and it gave a pathway for commercial entities to develop space nuclear systems. So those are some of the new developments that we need to leverage. Roger, did I miss anything?
No, you covered it really well. I think the one point I wanted to emphasize was the geopolitical point. I think we all need to recognize that every human on the planet looks up and sees the moon every night.
Yeah.
And we have two choices here. There can be a Chinese flag with no American flag on the moon, permanently powered with Chinese astronauts or taikonauts there. Or there can be a Chinese and American flag. There will be a Chinese flag on the surface of the moon. So when any human on the surface of the Earth looks up at the moon, will they see a Chinese and American flag, or will they see just a Chinese flag? And that's an interesting geopolitical question about how people will view the relative strength of our economic and political systems, right? Which of the systems is strong enough to have put a permanent presence on the moon, the first non-terrestrial human presence permanently in, off planet? Which of these two systems? Is it the Chinese system or is it the American system? We're going to have a Chinese flag on the surface. The Chinese they've done 35 reactors in the last 10 years. 35 reactors in the last 10 years. They're making huge investments in advanced nuclear technology, and they have a track record of delivering on their roadmaps. They have roadmaps that look out a decade or more, in fact, quite a bit more. And they have a track record of delivering on those. So there's a pretty high level of confidence that they're going to do this. The question is, are we? Right? And we have a choice.
And just by way of comparison, you mentioned 35 new reactors in the last 10 years. How many new reactors has the United States done?
I think one or two at most, if that.
I think one, Roger, the Vogtle reactor in Georgia, which was,
so
I think, $35 billion or something, and I don't know, decades late.
Yeah, and as Bhavya said, we have an opportunity. We can do this. We have to have the motivation to do it, and we have to get the government to partner with industry to do it, because industry right now is investing. There's a lot of venture capital going into advanced terrestrial reactor systems using HALEU, using the high assay low enriched uranium systems.
Operating at higher temperatures, which has commonality with space reactors.
Exactly. So there's a lot of, and by the way, all of those start-stops of the technology development programs, they did advance the technology, right? I mean, Krusty was a great program, and it demonstrated a fully integrated system using high-enriched uranium, but it demonstrated a fully integrated, very low power. It was subscale, and there are issues, and it needs to be scaled up, but it made real progress. Jimmo Prometheus, while it was canceled, did make real progress on various different parts of the technology. But so it's, we can do this. We just have to make the decision that it's important enough to do. And with mission pull and the geopolitical situation, it seems to us that this is the moment that we can cease and do it safely and relatively inexpensively. We don't have to spend, $10 billion to do this.
And just one more point on the geopolitical competition. I mean, you've spoken a lot about sort of the soft power element, all of humanity looking up. Are they going to see both American and Chinese flag, or just Chinese flag? In terms of what may be considered more economic or hard power, although the moon may seem like a large place, there's a limited number of areas, I understand, where there's resources that might be useful, such as water, to make rocket fuel or helium-3. And I guess, if they are able to establish exclusion zones in these key places, can you talk a little bit more about the dynamics that sets up in terms of competition over resources?
Go ahead, Bhavya.
So, yes, I mean, the Artemis program, the Artemis 3 landing will be on the lunar South Pole, where we believe there is, the best chance of water ice. And there's private companies looking at not just water ice, but helium-3, as you mentioned. I'm just a little bit more analytical about the power needs initially versus in the long term. On the moon in particular, solar is a pretty strong competitor. I mean, maybe not in the the permanently dark regions or in the craters where we have water ice. So there is a role for technologies other than nuclear. So on the moon, I think nuclear is part of a portfolio where we use, for some things nuclear, we have to, for some things solar, for some things batteries, fuel cells, etc. The place where I think the case for nuclear is just without question is Mars. So for example, Roger mentioned earlier that one of the plans we have, one of a private company has, is going to Mars with chemical propulsion. And that's fine, that can be done. It has some challenges, but it can be done. But for the return journey, they actually have to make propellant on the surface of Mars, for which they need about 1 megawatt of power to generate the level of propellant that's needed. If they use solar panels, they would need 14 football field size under the best of conditions because of dust storms and other reasons. So on Mars, nuclear, so this is kind of where I make that distinction between nuclear being enabling versus enhancing. For some parts of the moon, nuclear is enabling, as in we can do things only nuclear allows, and in some parts it is enhancing. But on Mars, it's almost exclusively enabling, and we just need to remember those two use cases. So when we develop something for the moon, we just need to remember that it is something that we would want to be using on Mars as well.
Right. And you say up front, you're not pushing one tech or one agency, you're offering a strategy. So why was it important to take a neutral, full spectrum approach across civil, defense, commercial power, and propulsion?
Well, this is it's a national question. I mean, we have struggled. NASA has led some space nuclear programs. The DoD has led some nuclear programs, and they've all failed, right? They all go for a year or 18 months or 2 years at most, and then they fail. They've all failed. And so we wanted to step back and say, okay, what should we do differently now? And to do that, we need to be agnostic as to which agency should lead. We needed to be agnostic as to how it should be organized and ask instead, what's the right way to organize this if we want to make real progress? And so that was a major focus of this, because one of the things that we found through all of our discussions in the literature is, as Bhavya mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, the fragmented leadership in space nuclear has been a major problem for the development of these systems, where you have a mission agency, NASA or the DoD, and then you have the Department of Energy with its role in the nuclear arena, and then for commercial you've got the FAA that also has a role to play, and the priorities are different across the different agencies. They're not aligned. There are many times competing interests. And there's very little common pull across the agencies. And so you get these very disparate objectives. And as soon as a program runs into a challenge, everybody's happy to walk away, which is, just as, Draco was another case in point.
Yeah, I think Roger and I don't have a stake. I mean, we truly are independent. We are obviously, we think nuclear is important, but even on that, Roger, I bet you'd agree with me that we are not even that partial to nuclear. I mean, we want the right power at the right time. Yes, we want to develop space, right? So, and nuclear is just one piece of the whole puzzle that needs progress. And again, to Roger's point, these communities are pretty siloed. Those who think about propulsion only think about propulsion. Those who think about power only think about power, even though there's all these commonalities between them. And again, it's the nature of our system that it's always a zero-sum game. Doing this means not doing that. So of course, everybody has to protect their turf, which is a very rational response to the system that we have. And I think Roger and I did not have those incentives. We were truly trying to develop what's the right first step to be able to do all of the above.
Yeah, because, as Bhavya just said, because it's a zero-sum game, it's critical to identify what's the right first thing to do, right? I love the way Bhavya says it. It's not one versus another. It's about strategic decision-making.
Yeah, and that's the sequencing thing that we talk about is important, because I think it's easy to say this is not an or, it's an and. I mean, of course, it's an and, but is it though? I mean, if there's only so much funding, and again, Roger and I last night were looking at the House and Senate markups on nuclear power and propulsion, and we were just thinking, how are some of these decisions being made? Because it is a zero-sum game. Unfortunately, it is truly unfortunate that it is. Ideally, we want to make progress on everything.
And what it means, this strategic sequencing means that, yes, you pick a first step, but that first step has to build to the subsequent steps, right? And the subsequent steps include power and propulsion, right? Because ultimately, if humanity is really going to expand into the solar system and beyond, we're going to need nuclear power, right?
And that's actually let's make that transition, because one of the most striking points in the report is that everything starts with power. Mm-hmm. And I found that particularly interesting because, of course, that seems counter to the common wisdom, right? If the most important space nuclear program recently was Draco, that was the opposite. Congress has been funding nuclear thermal propulsion. So why was that the conventional wisdom, and why does your report prioritize power over propulsion in the near term?
Go ahead, Bhavya.
So I actually want to give 1 minute on the philosophy of this, which is something I've been thinking about. Why our earliest programs, Rover, NERVA, our earliest programs were nuclear propulsion. Yes, we had the SNAP program, which was power. And yes, the only thing we have ever deployed in space was a power reactor back in 1965. So yes, we've invested in power as well. But somehow there is this romantic vision in our heads as a nation, as a people, as humanity, of going into the solar system, going beyond the solar system, and traveling to other parts of the universe. So I think the part of that is, that's why I think we have always wanted to pursue propulsion, which is why I probably continue to spend far more, 10 times or more on propulsion than power. But to your question about why is it that we start with power is, well, one, we have shown, history has shown that tech development alone without a mission pull doesn't stick. Again, I mentioned, Rover, and there's other programs, Timberwind, SNTP, now Draco, where we spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, with no operational system to show for it. Why? Because there was never a sustained mission pull, and we have that now. The mission pull, and again, we spend a lot of time thinking about it. There is no mission pull for NEP or NTP. The mission pull is for power. So we kind of are thinking, no mission pull here, expensive, mission pull here, easier to start. So that's one. And again, this easier to feel is actually an important point. We are talking about not megawatts of power in a first demonstration. And again, we can get into some of those details. We are talking about a small demonstration in the next 5 years. Power at that level really does build on 75 years of terrestrial nuclear power development. It leverages all of the recent advanced reactor work, which is receiving both private and government funding. No physics breakthroughs are needed. Engineering is tractable. It'll be easier to design, test, and validate. There's testing facilities. Again, we've been talking about this. Power has a path to near-term commercialization and economic development. There's multiple commercial companies, both that want nuclear power as users, but also want to supply. So there could be, it could be a commercial market. In short, power can fly sooner, demonstrate utility, and build confidence. And that confidence, in turn, creates a political and technical foundations to take on harder challenges like propulsion, which has a whole new set of requirements. And again, I think Roger and I want to be clear. Roger already said that. Starting with power doesn't mean ending there. Power uses many of the same core technologies as propulsion. NEP basically is just a power system with electric propulsion, EP as the load. All the investments that we would make in fuel production and testing facilities, regulatory frameworks, and workforce for power lay the foundation for later propulsion systems. And in fact, if we try to start with propulsion, as we have tried so many times, we need still all the same infrastructure, but without that near-term payoff that we get with power. And again, to risk saying, we've been saying is this is a strategic sequencing problem. Power first de-risks propulsion.
It actually
Roger?
will accelerate. We think it will accelerate the adoption of nuclear propulsion systems by de-risking it, as Bhavya just said. So we think that this is the fastest path to actual operational systems in both power and propulsion. And that's a very important point. I wanted to build on one additional point. I was the co-chair of the National Academy study that looked at nuclear propulsion for human missions to Mars. Mm-hmm. Bhavya was a committee member on that. So we both were active participants in that National Academy study. That study that study concluded that NTP was likely the simpler approach to a near-term demonstration. It wasn't a hard conclusion because, frankly, there are big risks in both of those propulsion systems. So we did not recommend down selecting to one or the other in the report. We rather said both needed investments. But we did say at comparing a megawatt class nuclear electric to a nuclear thermal, that there were more challenges in the more unknowns in the nuclear electric system.
Right.
So the point that Bhavya just made, that the first step we're talking about is not a multi-megawatt system. It's a 10 to 100 kilowatt. It might go up to 500 kilowatts at most. So there are existing ground test facilities for a nuclear power system at the scale that we're talking about. There are existing technologies for most of the systems. The technology challenges are much smaller at the 10 to 100 kilowatt range than they are at the multi-megawatt scale. And so starting small and then using that to advance the next steps, the follow-ons, is really the right path for the nation. Let's de-risk the future. Don't try to leap to the end point, right? And so I think it's not right to say, oh, in the National Academy study, you said that nuclear electric had more unknowns than NTP, because that's not the question that we were asking. We were asking about the strategic sequencing order for the national strategy in nuclear space systems development, which is a different question. And we came up with power first, low power that can leverage all of the terrestrial and the advances in technology that have happened, and policy and the existing infrastructure that exists. I mean, one of the things that you will read about why Draco was canceled is, to quote one of the senior military leaders who recently talked about it, the costs of technology and infrastructure for ground testing, the costs of the uncertainties in cryogenic fluid storage for NTP just outweighed the benefits from their initial analysis. Right? There are real challenges when you talk about these big systems. So we're saying, don't go big, go small at first.
And then move up the value chain. In fact, one of we had a discussion a few weeks ago with some folks within government, and one colleague said that let's solve, if we solve the propulsion problem, which is a harder problem, and again, just one example of harder, is a propulsion reactor. An NTP reactor has to operate at around 3,000 degrees, whereas a power reactor may be 1,000 degrees, so a huge difference. And his point was, hey, if you do the harder problem, you can do the easier problem. That is absolutely correct. However, we are never able to be funded enough or have the timelines enough to address the harder problem. So to some extent, what Roger and I have also done is, this is the system we are in. They say that you don't fight with the war, with the battle with the army you fight the battle with the army you got, right? So what we got right now is reasonably small steps of funding. And our proposal is a activity that is in line with what our system will currently allow. And again, I also want to reinforce, we are actually not saying at all that we shouldn't fund propulsion. I think there are some specific problems propulsion has, the high temperature reactor I just mentioned, that are sufficiently hard that it has a longer timeline, a longer fuse. And we do need to begin doing that. I think what we are saying is we need to fly something. And the quickest thing to fly is a power system, because that gives, as I said earlier, leaders, our decision makers, the confidence to actually create the mission pull. So, DOD sees, a 10 to 100 kilowatt reactor that's on the moon or in cislunar space, and they can see, this is how it's done. This is how much about costs. These are the regulatory barriers. This is how these barriers were addressed. Okay, here's a mission pull. So by doing this demo that we have proposed, we believe we unlock a mission pull for bigger systems that include propulsion systems.
And so you offer 3 options for moving forward, tailored to different political and budget environments. Let's start. Can you walk us through the logic of option 1, which you refer to as go big or go home? What does that look like?
I just want to really quickly interject that I said small. Small is, a relative term. It's certainly small compared to the 2 megawatt system that we evaluated in the National Academy report.
Sure.
The go big or go home that Bhavya will talk about in a second is up to 500 kilowatts. So 1/4 what we talked about in the NASEM. And that is a big program. So Bhavya, you want to talk about go big or go home?
Sure. So go big or go home, and Roger and I had so much fun coming up with these names, is 100 to 500 kilowatt electric demonstration. It could be power, it could be a nuclear electric propulsion system. The idea is that it is, sufficiently hard that it will take all of our energies to make progress. And we call meeting the Manhattan Project test. In order for go big or go home to succeed, we need a centralized lead with real budget and milestone authority. We need stable, multi-year, large sums of money insulated from annual swings. And we need a strategic imperative that's strong enough to align leadership and unlocks institutional will across our various institutions. We're proposing that, for political and other reasons, if you remember my, challenge number 3, the timeline mismatch, we're proposing that there be a ground test by 2028 and a flight by 2030. Our very general order of magnitude estimate for the cost of such a demonstration is this option is about $3 billion over 5 years. And it absolutely is going to require top-down White House and congressional support. What did I miss, Roger?
No, I think you hit it. I think the centralized leadership, the consistent funding, it's got to be a real national priority for our space activities. If go big or go home requires a tremendous amount of focus and centralized leadership with real authority.
Right. And so if that funding level and that extraordinary alignment required for option 1 is absent, we propose an option 2, which we call Chess Master's Gambit. Here we are talking about smaller power levels, 10 to 100 kilowatts. And we're also talking about 2 parallel streams. One is NASA running a public-private partnership, and we can talk more about that, for a small reactor on the surface of the moon, a surface reactor. And the other parallel stream, they don't have to be parallel in time. They can be staggered if they want to learn from each other, is DoD launching a similar demo, but in space. And the key here is that the government remains technology agnostic. Right now, there is spirited debates about whether we use Stirling or Brayton conversion cycles for power conversion, whether we use highly enriched uranium or high assay low enriched uranium, and all sorts of other decisions. What we are saying is let the government stay technology agnostic and really focus only on a bunch of high-level milestones around safety, performance, cost, and timelines, and then focus on enforcing the milestones. And these are public-private partnerships we propose, and they are fixed price. They are milestone-driven payments. It gives everybody incentives to not overpromise, to do what they say they would do. And our assessment for the cost is about $1 billion per agency over 5 years. And again, this is $1 billion to government. Industry brings money as well. In the first demonstration, for Gen 1 demonstration, it's about 25% of the total funding. The government funds most of it, but the second one, maybe that proportion is reversed. The idea here is, in this option is, so this is not a conventional procurement program like prior programs, which, by the way, as we've been saying, haven't succeeded. So let's maybe try something new, where industry sets outcomes. Government sets outcomes, industry defines a path. If executed well before 2030, we will have 1 or more nuclear power systems in space, creating mission pull, commercial capability, and political durability.
And multiple suppliers.
Yeah.
The way we designed the Chess Master's Gambit was each agency carries 2 suppliers through the ground test, and then they down select to 1 for flight. But that ground test is an integrated ground test. And so it's a full system demonstration on the ground. And again, one of the nice things about that low power is that you can use existing infrastructure to do it. It needs to be augmented, and we need infrastructure investments, as Bhavya will talk about in a minute. We need independent of the demonstrations, we need other investments in technology, infrastructure, and policy improvement.
Just one question that came to my mind as I was reading the report around the timelines is, can you remind me again, when is China saying that they are going to be operating a nuclear system on the moon?
2035.
2035. So if we're talking about doing this demo by 2030,
right?
What does it look like to get from that demo, and how is it different between Go Big and Go Home or Chess Master's Gambit in terms of getting to having an operational nuclear power system, by or ideally before 2035.
Yeah, I think either path. Again, with with the go big or go home, you have to meet the Manhattan test. So if you meet the Manhattan test, you can achieve a similar timeline to Chessmaster's Gambit, where in either case you end up with a 2 to 3 year time frame between the demonstration and the next generation, depending on production and budgets and those kinds of things. But it looks to us like we're really talking about 2033 at the earliest. For an operational, a first generation operational system after the demonstration. A couple years. You might be able to accelerate it depending on how much risk you're willing to take, but that kind of timing is realistic. So we would be able to get there first, but barely. And there's real risk because there is technology. There is new technology here.
Right.
I mean, it's not super new. It's not hugely risky, but problems will happen on these programs, and we will need to overcome those challenges, whatever they may be.
And you do offer a third option. My understanding was it's not instead of perhaps the other options, but more of something that could be potentially done concurrently. Can you just talk us through the third option and what that would accomplish?
Yeah, so the third option is actually not fission power, it's radioisotope power. And again, like you said, it is not, you don't pick one of three. This is something that we should do regardless. I do want to start with a caveat that our study focused on fission and we did not look at RPS systems as deeply, and more work needs to be done before, detail. Anybody can talk about the details, but the idea essentially is that we could have, and there's commercial companies working on this, we could have a potentially less than 1 kilowatt commercial radioisotope system on the moon. It won't power a lunar base or directed energy beam or take us to interstellar space, but it will enable survival through the lunar night. Right. But just as importantly, which is why we think that it's worth proceeding with in all scenarios, it clarifies some regulatory roles. It builds one kind of flight heritage, and it de-risks the ecosystem, not in the exact same ways as for fission, but in similar enough ways. And the idea here is to demonstrate to the public, to policymakers, that we can safely launch and operate space nuclear payloads. We earn public trust, we establish precedent, and we build competence in a lower risk setting. It's low-hanging fruit. It buys us time, credibility, momentum, no matter what, and it provides fallback if larger efforts slip, because it starts
to create the commercial ecosystem for space nuclear, right? It's radioisotope, yes, but it will be. I think it's really important for our nation to think about how do we build an economically viable and commercially founded ecosystem in space, and a commercial radioisotope as opposed to a plutonium-based system, which for now, for many good reasons, cannot be commercial. It's plutonium systems are government owned. And they are extremely expensive also. So these commercial systems with the alternative isotopes, strontium-90 and americium-241, may be significantly less expensive. In fact, almost, they will be significantly less expensive. And so having that commercial ecosystem will be very helpful to the nation, actually.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, can I just add one other thing, Timothy?
Sure.
So we don't mean to say that somehow commercial radioisotope using strontium-90 replaces the capability plutonium-238 has. I mean, if you want to go into the interstellar space where you want these systems to last for, 20, 30, 50 years, you're not going to be able to use these commercial systems. Right. So we do need to invest in something that is long-term. What that is, we can talk about. But what this is, we get through the lunar night, for missions that are few weeks to a few months, at least in the near term. And obviously commercial chains are getting stronger and better too. So they will move up the capability curve, but in this case, it is not, this replaces that.
So regardless of which option is chosen, you argue that we need more than just hardware. It's also about leadership, regulation, infrastructure. What are the non-negotiable pillars that must be in place for any of this to work?
Yes, so we have 4 non-negotiable pillars, and they are apart from the demonstration. And even in our budgets, demonstrations are actually half or less than half of that total amount. The other part of the budget goes to, 1, tech maturation. Whether it's for this first demonstration or demonstrations that come down the line, or that operational system we just talked about, we need investment in technologies such as braking conversion. Right now, we have, we may be able to launch systems that, power converter systems that work better at low power levels. But if we want to be operating power conversion at higher power level, we need Brayton and beyond cycles. We need more investment in power management and distribution, what's called PMAD. We need more investment in radiators. As you know, on Earth, when we get rid of heat from power generation, it goes away with convection, right? Air moves it away. In space, there is no air. So the only way to get rid of heat is, radiation. Remember middle school physics. So these radiators have to be much better. We need fault-tolerant operations. So the idea here is that the government needs to invest, and this truly has to be a government investment. The private sector will not invest in this area. And again, to repeat something I said earlier, we need to continue investment in propulsion technology as well. So we include propulsion investments in our tech maturation line. Second, infrastructure. We really lack, facilities like thermal vacuum chambers, reactor development and testing facilities, launch integration at launch sites. In addition to just the presence of facilities, there's also the issue of access. Without rapid access to critical infrastructure, the best designs will just stay on paper, and we cannot fly if we cannot test. So that's the second one, infrastructure. The third one is regulatory reform. Our current regime is slow, fragmented, opaque, and it's really, especially for nuclear, it's meant for terrestrial operations. We need a space-specific, streamlined, predictable pathway to approval that protects safety but enables execution. In particular, one thing that we especially need is a space-specific indemnification framework. Indemnification or liability coverage, we have it for terrestrial nuclear reactors. The government provides terrestrial nuclear companies coverage under what's called the Price-Anderson Act. There is no such thing for space. And in general, we need to have oversight by milestone, not endless review, which is the current norm. So that's a third part. And last but not least, sort of every pillar depends on this one final piece that Roger has mentioned, which is top-down leadership. Our whole domain, we've been talking about this, is sufficiently fragmented, under-prioritized, and cross-cutting that we need maybe a person or an office. And, it could be at Department of Energy, Department of Defense, NASA, it could be at the White House. And the idea there is that this person or office aligns timelines, budgets, and authorities across agencies. One option to do this could be a presidential executive order. We have a AI czar. Maybe we need a space nuclear czar. So with strong congressional language, any of these mechanisms can accelerate execution. What matters is not the specific instrument, but the commitment. So those are our 4 pillars. Roger, I'm sure I missed something important.
No, you didn't. I think you covered it really well. I think your listeners really need to think about space nuclear capabilities as an integrated whole. As, okay, to accomplish this, we need to fly soon. To do that, we need to focus on power, on lower power systems that are credible. We also need ongoing investments that are separate from the flight programs, the demonstration programs. We need those investments to be in technology maturation for follow-on generation of systems and for propulsion. We need infrastructure improvements, and we need policy clarification and streamlining and regulatory streamlining. That integrated package will enable our nation to really lead in space. Without that, we will fall behind. So we really need that integrated vision and the integrated strategy with strategic sequencing, to coin Bhavia's phrase, which it's a great phrase, in order to ensure that our nation leads in this area and that we establish a good pathway for space settlement, for the expansion of humanity into space.
Yeah, so this isn't just about flying a reactor, it's about geopolitical influence, commercial opportunity, and exploration capability.
Yes.
What's the risk of inaction? What happens if we don't do any of this and just continue muddling along?
Well, just to stick with a geopolitical framing, I mean, we lose first mover advantage. If China gets a reactor on the moon first, they'll define safety zones, they'll define licensing norms, they'll define operational protocols that the rest of the world will end up playing by.
And they'll demonstrate that their system has aspects of superiority over our system. To many in the world, not to us, but to many people in the world, that will be the perception.
And even going beyond geopolitics, Timothy, I mean, years and years ago, when I was a young one, I was speaking to Mike Griffin, and I think he said something like, great nations do great things. Mm-hmm. So, we shouldn't be letting China define what we do in space. We want, the risk of inaction is we lose out ourselves, regardless of anything. If we don't explore, the plumes of Enceladus, or if we don't dig into the ice of Europa, or if we don't go to interstellar space, if we don't discover life in the universe because we don't want to invest in that core thing power that will let us get everywhere we want to go. And again, I'm talking not just about power, I'm talking about power, propulsion, and everything. We suffer as humanity, as a species. And to me, that's the greatest risk of inaction.
Yeah, what future do we want for humanity? And if that future involves continued, growth and expansion, we've got to pursue this.
So let's talk a little bit more about the positive case as we're getting towards the end. What does success look like in 2030? What should we have flying or operating to know that we're on the right track?
So for me, having a space-rated fission power system, surface or in space, that was ground tested by 28, launched by 2030 is it's a small milestone, but it's a significant milestone. We demonstrated licensing, we demonstrated co-investment, we demonstrated mission utility, and that brings us the momentum to carry forward into bigger power systems, into propulsion in the 2030s. So I want to keep success, not, I make a distinction between story rhetoric, which I also like to make, and tangible progress, which is what I think we want to see by 2030.
And the only thing I would add to that is, in addition to that demonstration, I want to see the parallel investments in technology, ongoing investments in technology, infrastructure, and policy and regulatory streamlining. So what does success look like? It looks like a robust, growing community or enterprise focused on space nuclear systems writ large, as in power and propulsion, with power flying and propulsion on its way, and next generation propulsion systems, higher capability propulsion systems, higher temperature, higher power, on their way. And so a robust community working on those systems, partially privately funded, with significant private investment and significant commercial participation, would be success in my mind.
Just very quick time check. Roger, do you have only 4 more minutes, or can you
go longer?
Okay. Then I have a few additional questions that I'm gonna add, and I'll edit this part out where we talk about the time. Did anything come out of your interviews that surprised you? Were there any interesting contrarian voices?
I bet Roger and I heard different things. I'll say what I heard. I found it was surprising to me how united the community is on what the problems to solve are and what the next step is, which is moving out with power. And the reason that was surprising was even entities that are in one way or the other invested in propulsion felt power is the place to start. So that was kind of the surprise. And in terms of any contrarian voices, I mean, I think for me, I made a much stronger distinction between nuclear as enhancing and nuclear as enabling.
Hmm.
And and that insight came after I talked to people who pushed back on nuclear entirely. I think it is important for us to understand those views and really make the case for nuclear as distinct from can we do this with, let's say, chemical propulsion or can with solar and batteries. So the contrarian voices really helped us sharpen the case for nuclear, as far as I'm concerned. Roger?
I completely agree, and I would just say that we did hear from organizations that have strong vested interests in one thing or another,
Hmm.
and not surprisingly, they felt that they advocated strongly for their the things that the technologies that they were investing in. But when you step back from that, as Bhavya said, the community was pretty unified. Actually, people were really, some of it was grudging because it was contrary to some of their current funding, but they in general they agreed that the case for power, starting with power, was the strongest case. Um, and as Bhavya said, there are those who feel that solar, or for example for lunar power, there are some architectures using beamed solar energy, and those architectures can work for survive the night, or they can work for scientific instruments. What they don't do is they don't allow you to operate at scale through the night. And so, as soon as we made that point about wanting to create a in space economy that operated at scale and through dark periods, people generally, I can't think of anybody that disagreed that nuclear was essential for that scenario. And that's the future that we're interested in creating, is
Right.
where we have robust operations even in darkness.
And so what has the response to the report been so far?
It's been extraordinarily positive, Timothy. I was surprised. I was a little nervous, but there is general agreement that this is the right step, especially amongst people who think about this from a strategy perspective. This is not to say that there will be action in government, right? When Congress makes decisions, um, strategic clarity is just one, or mission accomplishment is just one dimension. Congress has to worry about a lot of other things as well, jobs in districts and other sorts of things. So while there's been extraordinarily positive response to the report, I'm hoping there is equally extraordinarily positive policy action, and that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to shift gears a little. So as I mentioned earlier, we're all working together in the context of the Institute for Space Science and Development. And we've been talking, in the discussion of the report about creating a future where there's possibility to develop space, to have various kinds of industrial activity, extracting water, making fuel, doing things on Mars. And to tease what we as a team are thinking about next, we have become very interested in the field of space economics. Bhavya, I know you have long been a leader in this area. setting up the first NASA chief economist office and all of the architecture around that. Why is it necessary to have a field of economics focus on space? What will this enable that isn't currently happening?
So space started off as being a very strategic sector. We had to, win the Cold War. We had to be on the moon, damn be the cost, right? I mean, the Apollo program was $300 billion, but it didn't matter. However, over time, space is becoming a domain just like air, sea, or land, not just a symbolic or strategic domain. In other sectors, we make decisions based on data and economic value. In healthcare, for example, we fund treatments based on comparative effectiveness. Space should be no different. So, I mean, again, Mars sample returns very controversial. We are wanting to commit billions of dollars to bring back rocks. It would be really helpful to have the analysis that shows that that is more valuable than, for example, sending in situ live detection instruments to Mars. But we haven't done that, or at least it's not publicly available. Right now, we are making very high stakes decisions without a consistent framework to compare costs, risks, and alternatives. I believe, and as you've noted, I have believed for many years, that
Yes.
a dedicated field of space economics would give us the tools to measure value, to weigh trade-offs, and to avoid hype-driven spending. And I don't need to tell you all how much of that is going on. We need to start treating space like the real place that it is, and that means applying economics like we do everywhere else.
Yeah, and I think one of the fascinating things that's happened over the last 10 to 15 years is the growth of the commercial space economy. Mm-hmm. Right now, that economy is focused on Earth, as in everything. The so-called space economy is based on launching into low Earth orbit and its communications, its Earth observation, its data transmittal or weather prediction, or everything is focused right around Earth. And one of the key next step questions that we need to ask is, how do we grow beyond that? What are the necessary tipping points that we have to reach in order to expand beyond that? And by the way, as Bhavya said, the comparative advantage question may tell us that that's a pretty tough thing to accomplish. Yeah. I mean, maybe there are some challenges in accomplishing that are going to take a few more decades. Fair enough. I think policymakers need to know the answers to those questions. What investments could they make in order to achieve those tipping points, in order to reach those tipping points where the space economy, where the economy of the United States grows not just because of the resources that we have here and our ability to observe them and communicate them with low Earth orbit satellites, but what are the necessary thresholds, technology, economic, policy, that we have to reach in order to start to think credibly about the impact of other resources, in-space resources, be it solar power or be it lunar water or asteroid mining or whatever? What are the thresholds that we need to reach from an economic perspective to start to grow the U.S. economy using those resources? And it's a different question, right? We've reached one threshold of economic development from space. What is it going to take us? What is it going to take to get us to the next threshold?
And just to close things out, I want to ask each of you the traditional final question. So starting with Bhavya, what is your favorite work of art? That can be a novel, movie, show, or otherwise about space.
That's an easy one, Timothy. Star Trek, no question.
And I will note you have a Enterprise in the background on your shelf.
Oh my God! Yes,
so this is not a surprise.
I do. Oh, here you go.
But why was that your favorite? I mean, why not Asimov or some other or Star Wars?
When Star Wars, that's fantasy. Star Trek is real. So, I mean, I guess Star Trek is a vision of a future where humanity doesn't just survive, but we get better.
Hmm.
What I love isn't the technology. Obviously, I love that too. But what I love is the mindset. It assumes we grew up. We figured out how to manage our worst
Yeah.
instincts, and then we went out. We went out not to conquer, but to learn. Um, but I think Star Trek skips over the parts where we didn't destroy ourselves, and that's where our job comes in. I think we want to work together to
Yes.
help build a bridge that gets us through the stupid centuries so we can get to the smart ones, we can earn the smart ones. If we want the Star Trek future, we have to fight for it, not with phasers, although those would be nice too, but with policy, power, and long term thinking.
Wow, I love that framing. Roger, how about you? What's your
Well,
favorite
it's
work of art
interesting
about
to
space?
contrast, yeah, Bhavya's vision with mine because I love Star Trek also for the same reasons that she did. But I found myself always focused on the time between now and then.
Hmm.
And so we have to get, as Bhavya said, the get through these, the next century until we can get to the smart times. And so for me, I love The Martian.
Hmm.
Why? Because it was about one of the next steps. It was about the challenges of getting through some of the very first missions to Mars. Yes, but if it had been about the moon, it would have been the same. Again, focusing on the engineering, the rigorous engineering challenges, the technology challenges that need to be overcome in order to get through the next century. So for me, it was The Martian, but only because it scratched that itch of mine to understand the nearer term future so that we can
Hey,
get
Roger,
to
can I
Star
say
Trek.
something? Obviously, I love the Martian too, one of my favorite movies of all time. But thing I kept thinking the whole time was, how much money did we spend to bring him home? And what is the comparative value, right? What else could we be doing?
Yes.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Yes, absolutely. And so there it gets at that analysis that is necessary and the rigor that is necessary to accomplish those
Well, I
missions.
look forward to us working together to do a nonfiction analysis of those kinds of trade-offs.
Let's find what investments we need to make as a nation in order to truly create that future
here,
for
here.
ourselves.
Yeah, that's the perfect closing. Bobby and Roger, this has been great. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
And please do recommend the report to your readers. And it's now downloadable from the ISSD website. So please, download, read, reach out to us. We welcome feedback.
Thank you to Bobby and Roger for joining the Multiplanetary Society podcast. And thanks to all of our listeners. If you like this content, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform to ensure you don't miss an episode and leave a review to help other people find it. If you're interested in commissioning any follow-on analysis of what was discussed here or to support work on space economics, please reach out to us through the contact form on our website at i-ssd.org. Thank you.